It's time for Glastonbury. The long, cloudy afternoon of April Fool's Day ebbed slowly away. Those cloud racks gathering about the distant Welsh mountains grew more and more ominous. Long swaying arms that stretched hooked fingers, hooded shoulders, nodding plumes, far streaming tattered banners, huge tilted swords and monstrous axes towered there over the western channel and neither advanced nor dispersed. In this pretentious hovering and lingering, they resembled those spirits of the departed in the ancient British Isles, of which Plutarch makes mention, quoting from the traveller Demetrius. Demetrius further said that of the islands around Britain many were uninhabited. He went on to the island which lay nearer to those uninhabited and found it occupied by few inhabitants, who were, however, sacrosanct and inviolable in the eye of the Britons. Soon after his arrival, a great disturbance of the atmosphere took place, accompanied by many portents, by the wind bursting forth into hurricanes, and by fiery bolts falling. When it was over, the islanders said that someone of the mighty had passed away. Moreover, there, they said, an island in which Cronus is imprisoned, with Belarius keeping guard over him as he sleeps, for, as they put it, sleep in the bond forged for Cronus. They add that around him are many deities, his henchmen and attendants. And when that threatened and menaced day drew to a close at last, if Will Zoyland, before turning off the electric light, had decided to take a stroll down those passages, and had got as far as the edge of the subterranean water, he would have been astonished to see the still recumbent figure of Mr. Garrett. There was quite a large audience collecting together that night to hear the first public speech by the new mayor. The Aber's tribunal did not offer very extensive accommodation, nor a very liberal number of seats for those who did get in, but, as the entertainment was given gratis, the latecomers to the meeting had no cause for grievance if they found themselves somewhat uncomfortably crowded. The only representative from the Elm was the redoubtable Emma Sly, who came, in a very literal sense, to spy out the land, for it may well be believed that a shrewd account, and a more succinct one than any other Glastonbury handmaid could have given, the mistress of the Elms looked forward to receiving while she ordered Philip's dinner on the following day. Miss Drew, too, refrained from attending the silly speechifying. But the Mrs. Rogers came from the Abbey House just as Penny Pitches, escorted by Isaac Weatherwax, came from the vicarage. Both the Deckers were there, as were also Dr. Fell and his formidable sister, Miss Bibby. All these characters I totally forget about. I don't remember who they are. Do we meet Miss Bibby? I don't remember her. Old Lawyer Beers turned up, rather to John Crow's surprise, bringing with him his daughter Angela, who had never looked paler, colder, more unapproachable, and more completely bored than she looked as she took her seat between her father and Mr. Stilley, the cashier of the bank. Miss Elizabeth Crow arrived in a very good time, escorted in true old-fashioned style by her plump maid Tossie Stickles, who, once in the hall, separated herself from her mistress and became all eyes to get a glimpse of her gentleman admirer, the nympholeptish Mr. Barter. In this hope, however, the girl was disappointed, for Barter was not present. Megan Gerd was in the front of the hall, taciturn and indifferent, wearing a velvet gown cut and flounced according to the fashion of at least a decade ago, and treating the whole occasion with a withdrawn disdain more worthy of the house of Rise than of the position of mayoress. Crummy, in a dress of bewitching simplicity, was turning her beautiful chin all the time to still hurried and furtive glimpses of Sam Decker, whose own attention was focused upon the entrance door, for he was at once hoping and dreading that Zoyland might have taken it into his impulsive head to bring Nell into town for this one occasion. Among the humbler members of the crowd there were present Mrs. Robinson and Mrs. Cole, Sally Jones and her brother Jackie. Jenny Morgan, the once lovely Glastonbury charwoman, had come too, bringing number one's little friend Morgan Nellie with her. But from the manner in which this woman's large tragic eyes kept closing and her sad underlip kept drooping and her shoulders kept leaning against the wall by one of the windows, it looks as if the mayor's speech would have to be very lively indeed to keep her from falling asleep. The old cronies, number one and number two, were seated in anticipatory bliss, side by side. Red Robinson sat on the back of the room, in which he felt to be the precise strategic position for the art of heckling, but he never once looked at Crummy. If he looked at any girl at all at that evening, it was at the gird servant Sally, but even those glances were quickly exhausted. Red's head was so full of politics that he had scant energy left to include love. Mr. Evans and Cordelia sat at the edge of one of the aisles in the center of the room. Mr. Evans seemed to be as much withdrawn into his thoughts as Mrs. Geard was withdrawn into the pride of her South Wales blood, for it was only once or twice that he glanced at the platform, although he was seated so near it. John and Marcy, the former arrayed as the insignia of a master of ceremonies and a neat dinner jacket, borrowed for the occasion from Tom Barter, but which was at once much too short and much too loose for him, were seated in the front row, which was occupied otherwise by old Mr. and Mrs. Stilley, the parents of the cashier, by the Reverend Dr. Sodbury, the rector of St. Benignus, and by Mr. Wallop, the ex-mayor. It cannot be said that Mr. Wallop looked quite as happy seated in the front row of his rival's audience as he looked in his cage, but he looked all the same about twice as happy as anyone else in the tribunal. Dave Spear and Persephone sat just behind the ex-mayor, and it gradually became a cause of much suppressed giggling and tittering at the back of the room to notice the manner in which the worthy obese man kept twisting his head around to talk to the beautiful Percy, whose brown boy curls and white shoulders, for though Dave was in plain ordinary clothes, Percy, for some caprice of her own, appeared in evening dress, seemed of great interest to him. Towards the roofs of Glastonbury, towards the Gothic roofs of the Abbot Tribunal, advanced that black cloud rack from the western sea, but although every now and then there was a deep, rolling peal of thunder, not one single drop of rain fell. These heavy, jagged clouds, this first of April's night, were like the evil clouds spoken of in the scriptures, for they were clouds without water. But the big church clock in St. John's Tower struck 8, which was the hour of the meeting, and there was no sign of the mayor, nor of any move to supply his place as if he did not come. There were 3 aldermen in the little waiting room at the back of the platform, and these worthy men were now beginning to perspire with perturbation. On the empty platform were 5 empty chairs, one for the mayor, one for old Mr. Bishop, the town clerk, and the other were for these anxious and nervous officials who were now growing distressingly conscious of their boots and trousers and socks, and were continually retiring to the little lavatory in the rear of the room. There were quite a number of young people at the back of the hall, some seated, some standing, some moving, restlessly about, and every now and then there would arise from this turbulent element various cries and laughter, and even clappings and hissings, as this or this crude jest was bandied about in connection with the absence of the mayor. St. John's clock now chimed and knew laconically and briefly that it was 8:15. The unruly element in this tightly packed little hall began to grow seriously troublesome. The jokes grew grosser and broader. "Mayor be drunk," cried one. "Better send that alderman to look for him at Michael's Inn," cried another. "Mayor be making April fools of us poor dogs, now he'd be rich and so set up," growled a third. "Mayor be enjoying himself with Mother Ledge in paradise," declared one lad, bolder than the rest. "Shush, shush," cried several voices. Meanwhile, Abel Twig and his crony Bart Jones were whispering together in high excitement. Them posters said 'twas for Glaston, and is holding his meeting. Seems to we were for to see how much foolin' Glaston folk could stand afore us cast me down, back where he was afore us lifted he up. Thus spoke old Jones in the ear of his friend, but number one was kinder in his interpretation. Maybe Mayor has been taken with the dizzies, like that women do summer from, when 'tis near their time. 'Tis a hard time thing for even a preacher like he to stand up before such a proud resembling. I'm not even trying with the voices today. Penny Pitches, who had taken her seat without shame by the side of Mr. Weatherwax, now addressed a personal appeal to that potestate. "'Twould be a moment for thee to strike up with one of these pretty songs, Isaac," she declared stoutly. "Think bloody Johnny bait the only one with can lift up voice?" Shut, woman," murmured the gardener reproachfully. "This be a time for authority to speak. The man I be wantin' to hear from be Mr. Philip Crow. He be the gent to send all these gobbling geese to the right about." A long rolling thunder clap responded to the gardener's words from those slowly gathering clouds above the tribunal. "Hark to it!" cried Penny Pitches. "He'll come the quick, or he'll be drenched to the skin." The sympathetic Sally Jones, seriously concerned about the fate of her master, murmured anxiously in Jackie's ear, "I can't keep my eyes from Mrs. Beck, I can't. She must be shivering and shaking inside, poor dear. 'Tis terrible responsive to be sitting up so straight and master not there." "He don't think, Sal, do he," whispered the excited Jackie, "that the thunder have hit him in the highball like it used to hit they poor girl men in Bible?" St. John's deep-voiced clock now chimed the half-hour, and it soon died away in the midst of a thick, deep, reverberating peal of sudden thunder. Sullen thunder. "Why isn't there any lightning, Father?" said Angela Beer to Lawyer Beer. "I haven't seen one single flash all this evening." The girl let her eyes rest, as she spoke, upon the beautiful nape of Persephone's neck. Those brown boyish curls were beginning to touch a vein of perilous susceptibility in that reserved nature. It is, in fact, at moments of this kind, when a company of fellow townspeople are gathered in close proximity, with nothing to do but to stare at one another, that all sorts of unexpected relationships leap into being. "We didn't have to hurried away through our dinner after all, it seems," said her father's characteristic reply to this question about the lightning. "Not a drop of rain, Sam," said the vicar of Glastonbury to his son. "I'm glad of it," murmured Sam, thinking to himself that his Nell might, even yet, be on her way to the tribunal. It was at this moment that old Mr. Shepherd, the Glastonbury policeman, moved up to the back of the town clerk's chair. "Hadn't he better begin, sir?" he said innocently. "Maybe his worship ain't coming, and these young rogues will be getting out of hand soon." The town clerk nodded wearily, got up from a difficulty from his creaking chair, for he was past 80, and made his way down the hall. He paused for a minute by the side of John Crow, with whom he held a brief consultation, watching with intense curiosity by everybody in the place. Then he entered the room at the back of the platform. Here he found the three aldermen, who advanced to greet him in trepidation and consternation. "Come on, gentlemen," he said, in the tone of an aged warrior, who had weathered crisis for worse than this trifling one in the course of his long life. "On to the stage with you. I'll open the meeting and call up the mayor's secretary." Herding the three nervous magnates in front of him, like three reluctant and sulky bullocks, the gallant Mr. Bishop scrambled up the platform steps after them and took his seat in the mayor's chair. The four men were greeted with uproarious applause, and the clapping and shouting continued for at least 3 solid minutes. "3 cheers for Mr. Bishop," shouted one young scaramouch, who had perched himself upon the high sill of one of the great mullioned windows. The town clerk rose to his feet and advanced to the square table in the center of the platform. Here he raised his hands for silence. The general relief at the presence of someone who was so great that he was responded by an impressive and startling hush. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bishop began, we have come here to listen to our distinguished fellow citizen, the newly elected mayor of Glastonbury, Mr. John Cowper. "Hear, hear," came the magnanimous and comfortable voice of Mr. Wallop from the place in the front row. "But since," Mr. Philip Bishop went on, "the inclement weather, or some other cause of presence unknown, has prevented our much regretted mayor from being present at this meeting, which he himself called together, it behooves me, as his humble official subordinate, to call upon his secretary, my young friend Mr. John Crow, to tell us, or read to us, if possible, in the mayor's own words, a résumé." This was the only long word in the town clerk's repertoire of public speaking that he pronounced incorrectly. "A résumé of our distinguished friend's inspiring ideas with regard to the future of our beloved town. I therefore call upon Mr. Crow to—" There arose at the instant such a curious hubbub at the back of the room that the three aldermen leaned forward from the edge of their chairs and craned their necks to see round the speaker's back and under the speaker's armpits what it was that caused the disturbance. When the worthy men did realize what was the cause of the confusion, they gazed at one another and at the back of Mr. Bishop in sheer dumbfounded stupor. The people in front of the audience began themselves turning around now, and soon among them, when they realized what was occurring, began to raise their hoarse, grating susurration, which indicates to any experienced speaker the complete impossibility of receiving a quiet hearing. And what that disturbance is all about, you're going to have to wait till next time. So until next time, hang in there.